Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome back to us talking about, Islam and the Crusades and the Holy City and all that stuff, right? So where we left off in class, we were talking about, what were we talking about? We were talking about Islam, right? It was really, really fun talking about Islam with y'all. I really loved how much you guys knew. I was super, super impressed by that. Thank you so much, Miss Tax. Love seeing Christina Garcia just being like, yes, I'm digging this right now. She's very, very into world religions. Very, very cool stuff. Molly Jernigan also apparently has been to it's a Mumbar, I can never remember what it's called, but the feast after Ramadan, right? So it's very cool to hear all y'all's thoughts and ideas on it. Very, very impressed, right? But now the big thing, though, that we do need to talk about when we're talking about the Middle Ages is the series of holy wars over this city, right? Jerusalem. So we left off in the last flip talking about what Jerusalem is, where it is, right? So Jerusalem, thank you so much, Rebecca McKenna, for locating it on a map, is in modern-day Israel, right? So modern-day Israel is the home of Jerusalem, and it's a very, very important place for a lot of different reasons. Not just because it's a holy site, but also because it's a major trade port, trade area, a hub during the Middle Ages, between the growing Muslim empires and caliphates that actually exist in Saudi Arabia, going all the way through northern Africa, but also between the Byzantine area as kind of a buffer state before being invaded by other different tribes or groups of people from down towards Saudi Arabia, past what is now modern-day Turkey, right? So if this is Constantinople right here, this down here would be Jerusalem. So as you can see, this area right here, including Jerusalem, does serve as a kind of the end zone between the divider of European kingdoms as well as Arabic kingdoms to the east, right? So the thing about it is that the Muslims took control of the Holy Land, right? Now, when we say the Holy Land, we mean Jerusalem, okay? Now, just so you know, though, they had it for a while. The Seljuk Turks had controlled Jerusalem for quite some time. They actually didn't, a lot of, historians or high school teachers might tell you that it was the second that they took Jerusalem, then here come the Crusaders. It's not actually what happened. They actually had it for a pretty good little bit amount of time, but it was not until they started to threaten the Byzantine Empire, right? That the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, an Eastern Orthodox emperor, calls for help from the different European kingdoms to come and help save the Holy Land on a crusade, and also to basically help save them by creating a series of new buffer states between these growing Middle Eastern kingdoms and the Byzantine Empire, right? So since Turks took control of Persia and other areas, that's going to start leading the Byzantine Emperor to call for help, because they're like, oh, okay, Seljuk Turks are now taking over the Persians, they're now taking over the Holy Land, they're expanding into North Africa, it is a matter of time until they attack us. So they call out to a very, very important and famous pope. And that pope is named Urban II, right? And Urban II is this guy right here on top of his scaffold delivering a series of fiery sermons after a very, very important meeting. That meeting was called the Council of Claremont, which took place in 1095 AD. At the Council of Claremont, Pope Urban II called for a great pilgrimage. Do me a favor, underline pilgrimage, highlight pilgrimage. Because as we did notice when we were talking about Islam, pilgrimage is supposed to be a peaceful journey to a holy site, right? Not a war. So we will talk about that a little bit later on, but it is important to remember that he did call it a pilgrimage, which is a very loaded term, right? So the Council of Claremont is going to call for this great pilgrimage to go to the Holy Land, and he's probably just hoping that the Muslims will attack and it'll turn into a war, and that, of course, him being Eurocentric and a European, he believes that they're going to have no problem actually taking over these different areas and taking it back from Arabic warriors and things like that. But remember, the Muslims are going through a golden age right now. You're stepping into a really big bear trap, Urban. But the thing is he calls for all Christian warriors. Very important word there. Warriors, which denotes knights and vassals to go and fight against the Turks. Another big thing he also tells them as well is that if you go off and fight against the Turks, it is considered a planetary indulgence, right? A planetary indulgence is the idea that your soul will be completely cleansed of all of its sins. And so if you die in this process, you will ascend immediately to heaven as a Christian warrior. Pope Urban, you're kind of encouraging violence against other people and kind of along race-based lines, so maybe you should chill out a little bit. But the big thing about it, though, is like I've said before, Pope Francis and many other Catholic leaders have come out in the past and said, okay, that was a pretty dicey move. That does not reflect the Catholic faith, right? So the thing about it, though, is this is the Brother Martin mascot. This is what you believe that you're going to see when you talk about a crusading knight, right? So crusading knights, of course, clad in armor, very, very famous group of them being the Knights Templar, clad in armor, very wealthy, vassals of noble lands and estates, right? Heavily trained in military experience. They're going to go off, fight, and they believe win this war. Problem is that the number of people that went on this crusade that would have looked like this was actually really, really small, right? Due to the fact that the bulk of the people were actually a bunch of poor people and like washed up knights, right? So what I mean by washed up is like old knights that should have been retired and like their armor might have been a little rusty. They should have called it a quits early on, right? Now the thing about it though is that most of these crusaders that are going to end up going on the first crusade are actually just like poor people. And a lot of it is because this guy right here, his name is Peter the Hermit, right? Peter the Hermit. Peter the Hermit stood on top of these steps right out front of a church after the Council of Claremont in about like 1096. And he says, Pope Urban II, our Holy Father, has called for all Christian warriors to go on this crusade to Jerusalem, this mighty pilgrimage. What say you? And then all these people are like, oh, I'll go. And it's just a bunch of poor people, though. So there's a problem that you're going to have when a bunch of poor people with sharp things go off and they're going to try and find Jerusalem. One, none of them can read and write. None of them know where they are. None of them know where Jerusalem is. None of them don't understand that, like, religious tolerance towards, like, Judaic people is probably important because, they're not even doing anything in this whole thing. So you got a big quagmire issue right now. Peter the Hermit is going and freaking out and being like, let's go get him, and like doing all this other stuff. And it's setting up a little bit of a problem because the First Crusade is sometimes also referred to as the People's Crusade, right? Because about 30,000 people in total answer the call to the Crusades, which is an overwhelming force, right? And there's a big reason why this is the only crusade that Christians win. There are two types of people that went out. One type of person and two groups of them were peasants and garbage knights, right? Like these people that are just wandering around. Apparently they would get to every new city and be like, hey, is this Jerusalem? And people would be like, no. This isn't Jerusalem. This is like Germany, bro. You need to keep going, all right? They'd be like, oh, okay, cool. You Christian? They'd be like, yeah, we're Christian. What's up? And they'd be like, okay, cool. And then they would keep moving. And then when they started getting into these areas down here, they'd be like, is this Jerusalem? And they'd be like, no. You're like closer to Greece and stuff like that. This is actually what is like, like Magyar, which is like Hungary. And they're like, you Christian? They're like, oh, no, we're Jewish. And they were like, what? And then they would like burn down synagogues with people in them, right? So like the poor crusades or the People's Crusade was a really big problem because they basically, as they went through and established these different states, they massacred Muslims and Jews along the way that were completely peaceful people. That was the People's Crusade. The trained knights, on the other hand, did not do this, and they were actually showing up in the wake of all of it. The People's Crusade were ahead of them. They actually got all the way through to Constantinople, and they almost sacked Constantinople completely. Because it's a crusade, also the People's Crusade is a hilarious failure, because they did eventually get to Jerusalem, these like poor people and terrible knights, and they were absolutely destroyed by like Muslim armies, right? Because the Muslim army showed up fully trained, very ready to go, very well equipped, and they just destroyed this giant group of poor people that had been, destroying Muslim and Jewish communities along the way. Now the trained knights, though, of the First Crusade were strong enough to push into the Holy Land and to retake Jerusalem, mostly just because a giant group of poor people kind of showed up first and kind of weakened the Muslim forces. Now, the Christians then after that, though, the Christian crusading knights, the actual trained knights that Urban II wanted to go, ended up establishing 4 new stronghold states. Those 2 stronghold states are going to be known as Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. Say hi, Mr. Mortensen. It's the honors kids, and you know them very well. We're talking about the Crusades. Do you know anything about the Crusades?
All kinds of stuff. You have to sub to that, that's all.
Oh my god! Wait, whoa! This isn't my sub period. My sub period's E.
Is that your off period?
Yes.
Go talk to her then. I don't know why you're yelling. Go talk to her.
All right, thanks, bud. Anyway, as y'all just witnessed me get terrible information about having to sub today, which thank God I'm recording this now, right? So now look, the trained knights, though, of the First Crusade are going to be strong enough to establish these 4 states: Edessa, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. And now what I mean by like states per se, all right, so it's kind of just like little areas, right? They like establish like these little places, like almost like counties or parishes or whatever. Edessa up here, Antioch, Tripoli, and Jerusalem. And then along those states, they're going to establish like little like castles and forts and strongholds to actually protect from future Muslim attack. Now the thing about it though is the Second Crusade, which we're only going to talk about for about like 2 seconds, is when the Muslims took control of one of these states and they called for a second one, right? Oh, God, that burp was gross. The place is called, though, Edessa, right? And Edessa is located right there. In 1144, the Seljuk Turks are going to invade Edessa and retake it, right? So they're going to retake it. And the thing about it is if you're going to lose one of these crusading states, that's the worst one to lose. Because as you can see, it's like close to Constantinople and also to the Byzantine. It's close to the island of Cyprus. And it's a key marking foothold that's going to actually weaken the rest of the crusading states later on in the future, right? So that's going to call for a second crusade. Crusading knights show up, and they get absolutely murked by all of these Muslim soldiers. And so the Second Crusade is a massive failure. Now, the Third Crusade, on the other hand, is slightly tied to the Second Crusade, right? Most of it due to the fact of the 2 men that fought against each other in the Third Crusade, right? The Third Crusade, though, is going to take place. Now, if you notice the years, though, First Crusade's 1096, Second Crusade's 1144. This Crusade's going to be closer to about 1180. It's about 40 years later, right? So let me double check that, actually. Third Crusade. So the Third Crusade is going to be actually taking place in 1189. Whoa! Oh my God, how do I remember these dates? Now look, the big thing though is that the Third Crusade gets called for one particular reason. This guy right here, Saladin, becomes the new Sultan of Egypt, right? Now, and the really interesting thing that's going on though is in Egypt is like the Caliphate doesn't have as much power there as they want them to, and there's this person known as a vizier or a sultan that ends up taking power, and through a big progression of different lineages and a lot of family infighting, this guy, Saladin, comes forward as the new leader, right? Now, the thing about it is he has a chip on his shoulder, right? He's got a massive chip on his shoulder against crusading knights because they were supposed to mind their own business. But they supported people that went against his uncle and the people that were actually in charge of in charge of Egypt, right? And so he is very upset about this. He is a very prideful Muslim. He is an amazing general, and apparently he's a fantastic dad. He had 17 kids, all right? So like now, but the thing about it, though, is he decides to attack Jerusalem and take control of the entire area of those 4 states, the including areas of Saudi Arabia. He gets into several skirmishes with other crusading knights, but he doesn't actually end up taking the city of Jerusalem quite yet, right? So he ends up taking all the areas around it, though, right? And this freaks out all these Christian leaders, and they decide to start a new crusade. And several nobles answer the call for this new crusade, right? That's Saladin right there. And this is one of those nobles, right? That guy right there, Richard the Lionheart. Well, the thing about it is like, 2 other guys answered the call as well. One was named Frederick of Barbarossa. He was the Holy Roman Emperor. But funny fact about Frederick Barbarossa is he's going to try to walk all the way there. He ends up trying to ford a river with armor on, and he drowns, which is hilarious. So his crusade doesn't make it there. Philip II, which is the king of France at the time, goes on this crusade as well. But he hates the king of England, who is the other guy going on this crusade. And that guy's name is Richard I, a.k.a. Richard the Lionheart, right? So Richard the Lionheart is a terrible nickname for this guy because actually most of the people of England did not like him whatsoever. But Richard the Lionheart tried multiple times to retake Jerusalem from Saladin, but failed, mostly due to the fact that Saladin is a genius military leader. And he positioned his military outside in the desert, knowing for a fact that crusading knights from England aren't going to be able to fight in like a desert, right, or a desert climate. So every single time Richard tried to invade Saladin's posts in the desert, he would actually end up not being able to even get there because they'd run out of supplies, or they would have infighting in officers, or all these other problems, right? And so basically, in a nutshell, after several years of fighting, they sue for peace, and what ends up happening is Richard is going to be forced to go back to England after never recapturing Jerusalem. So yes, everybody else, the Muslims end up winning another one, so it's 2-1, and then they retook Jerusalem completely, and Richard the Lionheart ends up having to go back to England. Now, the funny thing about it, though, also, is that actually when Richard, jot this down really quick, when Richard the Lionheart was going back to England, he actually got kidnapped and held for ransom, right? And his family actually didn't want to pay it. They were like, you can keep him. We don't like him. People in England don't like him either. They call him the Lionheart just to be nice. Now look, but the big thing about it though, going into it, is there were 9 crusades in total, right? So there were fourth and later ones. Crusaders are going to end up attacking Constantinople and lead to the disorganization and lack strong leadership because they didn't know where they were, and they ended up attacking a Christian city, which caused the Fourth Crusade, which is another failure. 5 more crusades are going to follow, but the Muslims are going to remain in control of the Holy Land, and basically the Crusaders only ever got away with winning 1 crusade, which is really embarrassing, right? So now the big thing about it, though, is we'll talk about this a little bit later on, all right? If we have time, we'll talk about it in class. But this is actually really, really important, the effects of the Crusades, right? So the effects of the Crusades are going to be massive, okay? They're going to have economic effects, political effects, social effects, as many, many more, right? The economic effects, though, mostly, though, are really important because trade and trade goods are going to increase, right? Cultural diffusion, because cultural diffusion does occur in both war and trade, right? So even though you're going to war, you are seeing trade goods increase throughout these different empires and these different places because people are at least coming into contact with one another, right? Political changes are going to happen as well. A bunch of these lords are not going to return to their land. Since they're not returning to their land, it's going to lead to the king stripping that land from their family. It's going to give the king even more power in England and in Europe and in France and in these different areas, leading to the growth of the power of monarchs into the late Middle Ages, right? Social changes are going to happen as well. Christianity is going to end up isolating itself, and basically what becomes like an informal barrier between the Christian kingdoms of Europe and the Muslim kingdoms of the Middle East and North Africa becomes the city of Constantinople / Istanbul, right? That becomes kind of like this window into the other place, right? And since Christians are isolating themselves from other faiths, so it's going to lead to ignorance, racism, and negative views of these other places like the Muslims as well as the Jewish kingdoms or Jewish communities that exist on the other side of that informal barrier, right? Now, also in the long run, Muslims are going to begin to view Christians as invaders and like people that are there to attack like their different territories and stuff. So it does actually, you can feel the reverberations of the Crusades even until this day when it comes to cultural bias like towards like other different areas, of course, from Europe to the Middle East, right? Now, going into it though, also odd things about the Crusades. Before the Crusade, the church power had reached its height, right? So that actually, oh, here we go, yeah. The church power had reached its absolute height, right? Because like in the 1080s, before the First Crusade actually even happened, Pope Gregory VII and Henry IV were a really good example of 2 kings that hated each other, and papal supremacy was just ongoing, right? Like Pope Gregory ended up like excommunicating this guy's entire kingdom, and then Henry was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I don't want to go to hell. And then he made him wear a shirt made out of hair, right? So like it's a very, very weird thing. But nobles also would constantly fight each other for land and power. So there's an opinion on this by many historians that think that Urban II might have just wanted to unite Europe against a common enemy to keep them from fighting one another, right? Also, Pope Urban never claimed the Crusades to be a holy war. He sent the Christians on a pilgrimage, hoping that Islamic groups would attack and cause the war in and of themselves. And last but not least, most of the Crusaders were nobles who were leading bands of poor people. Very few of them were like just actually trained knights in general. But that's it. That's the Crusades, all right? So I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a good one.